presentation on ancient Lemuria, on some discoveries that he has found in his travels from Tokyo back into the United States through the Pacific Ocean. And so once again, I'd like to say that we're very honored to have this gentleman present to us some of his data coming from his research, which we are privileged to hear. So if I could get you all to give them a warm welcome. We have the magazine, and he has so many magazines, so if anybody has any interest, let us know.
Thanks. Thank you, Uma. And it's a real privilege and an honor to be able to make my presentation to you today, because I feel that I am a student. I don't try to portray myself as an expert in anything. I'm not a professional archaeologist. My background, as Uma said, is in journalism, so it's my job to be able to take this vital, important information that's really vital for all of our people, and to try to make it accessible and understandable, put it in everyday language, and that's what our magazine is about. What I want to talk to you about today is the lost history of black Americans. And I'm talking not only about the blacks that are here north of the Rio Grande, but through our entire American continents, north and south. It started for me when I traveled through Mexico about 11 years ago. And I went to a place called Tres Zapotes, or the Three Shoes, which is on the Atlantic coast of Mexico. And there I saw, in a museum, this magnificent sculpture of a stone head, 9 feet tall, weighs 40 tons. Magnificently done, of obviously a black African, portrayed in a kind of a helmet or a crown. I learned that there were about 18 or 19 of these which were found all along the coast of Mexico, and that they were all reliably dated to 1,200 years before Christ. In other words, 3,200 years ago. They belong to a civilization called the Olmecs. Now, when I saw this great head, I thought, well, this couldn't possibly be a black American, but it looks like it. Then I investigated the others. I saw the others that are available. They also portrayed different black Americans, some with full features, some with thinner ones, different individuals. And yet the archaeologists tell us that no, there was no one over here from either Africa or Europe or Asia before Columbus. That is what I was told when I went to school, and it's what the archaeologists and what the establishment teachers still tell people, that there was no contact between the Americas and the ancient world before Columbus. I found that beyond this collection of these great stone heads that belong to this Olmec civilization, that there was a lot more information which is not getting out to the general public about this previous black civilization. It was a black civilization that was here. Now, to give you an idea when this civilization flourished 3,200 years ago, what was going on in the rest of the world at that time? Well, there was no Europe. There was only part of Greece. Troy was the big, powerful city at the time. There was no Rome. Egypt was a great power. There was a power going on in China. But more importantly for our discussion here, there was also a great power here in the Americas. We call it Olmec, the civilization, the first known civilization. It means rubber, and it refers to a great ball which these people used to make for a sacred ball game. The word Olmec is a term which archaeologists use just to identify these people. They don't know what they were called. Now, if it was only those stone heads, figure, well, maybe it's coincidence or something. But about 1920, a Polish anthropologist was doing work in Yucatan, right in Tres Zapotes, and he found the remains of several burials of black people that dated back before Columbus in this very same area. On top of that, throughout the rest of this century, smaller sculpture has been found in the Olmec area, definitely portraying black people. and related to this first civilization. Now, when these great black heads were first found in 1862, the Mexican, the European, and the American archaeologists said, well, these were just happened to be slaves who were blown overseas, and they made statues of them. But yet the local people there, the native people, referred to those as black kings, sometimes as African kings. Also, if you have a slave, you're not going to create this huge, magnificent monument to someone that's the lowest part of society. You only create giant monuments to your most important people in society. On top of that, all of these great heads that were found were not just laying out in the open. They had been ritually buried with reverence, which means that they probably were great monuments at one time, and that there was a period of mourning, and then they were ritually buried, sort of you interred the greatness of this person. To give you an idea how magnificent these stone heads are, I should mention one thing before I forget too. The archaeologists say, oh no, they don't represent black Africans at all. They represent a kind of Indians. But they resemble, as you'll see in the slides here tonight, nothing resembling Native American Indians. On top of that, they are all crafted out of black basalt. They're not, in other words, the basalt was chosen specifically to represent a black person, someone with black skin. They weigh 40 tons, and they were quarried in a mountain area that was 50 miles away, quarried there and sculpted there, beautifully sculpted, and then transported more than 50 miles to the capital of the Olmec civilization. Well, that's why he can sit there, that's all right. That'd be the same thing today as if you went, say, out to Gainesville, Georgia, found a boulder, crafted it perfectly, and by hand were able to transport it, this 90-ton work, all the way to the downtown Atlanta area. So whoever did this, they were obviously a great people with social organization on the same par of their artistic achievement. This is by no means the end for evidence of blacks in the Americas. A mound, a ceremonial mound, was opened in the year 1901 in northern Wisconsin, outside of the Apostle Islands. Now that's extreme north part of Wisconsin, right on the upper Great Lakes. When this mound was opened in 1901, the bones did not look Native American, and the skulls especially did not look Native Americans. Native Americans, you can tell almost at a glance that they are Native American skulls because the teeth, they meet. The upper and lower jaws. They have either no overbite or very little overbite. These jaws had pronounced overbite. So when the archaeologists found these skulls, they began to think, well, who do these people represent? So from that overbite, they investigated the rest of the jaw structure, the cheekbone structure, the periantals, this area up here, and unquestionably they belong to black people. Now, to be interred in a mound was a sign of honor. The average person in the Native American cultures in Wisconsin, when they died, they were usually buried under the floorboards of the house. It went down further and further. You kept the family literally in your domicile, or else if they were common people, workers and so on, they were just buried anonymously in Potter's Field. The mounds were reserved exclusively for regents, kings, shamans, priests, the movers and shakers of society. These 4 black men that were found in this mound were laid out respectfully with copper goods. Now there's a key there. What were these ancient blacks doing up in northern Wisconsin more than 1,000 years ago? And why with copper goods? The upper Great Lakes of our country forms the richest deposits of copper on earth. Among the largest, but more importantly, the richest, the highest grade copper. It appears that these black Africans were in the upper Great Lakes mining that copper. We do know, for example, that the upper Great Lakes area was the scene of a massive complex, highly sophisticated copper mining operation. It was so complex that whoever these ancient people were, they dug a trench 5 miles long, were able to drill 60 feet through solid rock to remove this high-grade copper, and they were able to remove, while they were working up there, an astounding 500 million pounds of copper. Now, the Native American Indians, they used copper, was known as float copper. They'd pick it up off the ground and they'd make it into bracelets and so on. They didn't use much of it. Somebody was involved in making huge amounts of copper mining. Now, who could that have been? Well, if you look on the other side of the world, there were black kingdoms in West Africa, some of them known as Ghana and Mali. And if you study those cultures, and a lot's known about them because they lasted all the way to about 1400 AD, when the Arabs came in. These people were great goldsmiths, great metallurgists. They used lots of copper. Now, what's interesting, folks, is in that area of Africa, there are not many great deposits of copper. Where did they get all this wonderful copper? It's also known that these Africans were tremendous seafarers. They had things known as power canoes, in which there were 60 men manning these canoes. Then, on the other side of the United States, in California, you had a black tribe. And I will show you a drawing that was made from life, a beautiful illustration from life of a man decked out in a kind of an Indian getup, but he is definitely not an Indian. He is a black person. What are we to make of all this? These wonderful comparisons. First of all, there is no doubt whatsoever, regardless of what the establishment archaeologists say, that there were sizable numbers of black people in the Americas, and they were not slaves blown out overseas by mistake. They actually had come here for specific economic and cultural purposes. They raised kingdoms here. Let me just quote from my notes. I don't like to normally do that, but there's so much information here. My brain is so small, I can't get all this stuff down. One of the things that's interesting is that there was a 16th century historian. His name was Peter Martyr. This was a man who was with the Spanish expeditions to Mexico. He was an eyewitness to the Spanish conquest. And in his chronicles, he writes exactly what happened. And Peter Martyr, who accompanied Balboa, you know, the guy that was looking for the Fountain of Youth through Florida, they actually saw native blacks in Florida in the year 1513. There was also a priest by the name of Gregoria Garcia. He said that there were blacks on an island north of Colombia, again in the 16th century, and that the people in Panama referred to a Negro king or a black king who had just recently died. Garcia's associate, his name was Bartholomew Las Cosas. He reported blacks in Florida. They even wrote down the names of these black tribes. The black tribes were known as the Jamasi of Florida, the Caribes of St. Vincent, and the Chirusas of Brazil. And they were regarded as indigenous black people. In other words, they were there before the Spanish arrived. When the Spanish arrived, they just immediately enslaved them. Those that survived the diseases that were introduced by the Spaniards. So very little of what is known about them beyond these reports exists today. Now, since this information has come out, there has been great strides made in DNA. You're all familiar with the O.J. Simpson trial, how they can get blood types down. And in this DNA research, anthropologists, archaeologists, using computers, have been able to trace the different races that inhabited the Americas before the Spaniards arrived. One of the groups they've traced definitely are Mongoloid that came across the Bering Straits. Now, these terms that I'm using have no social bearing. So when I say Negro or Negroid, it's the same I'm using Caucasoid or Mongoloid. These are scientific terms to identify people. I'm not talking in social terms. The people that came across the Bering Straits, we know about, okay, were Mongoloid. Definitely became the Indians and so on. At least two black strains, pre-Columbian they call them, before Columbus here, existed in America. One of those strains, those black strains, is unequivocally traced back to West Africa. This is revealed in some of the sculpture, the Olmec sculpture, which shows some of the blacks with a peripheral ridge, barely perceptible, a peripheral ridge around the lips. That is traced to a genetic type found in Ghana. It shows you also how excellent the artist was in portraying a real-life person.